The courtroom fell silent as Michael Wilson walked in, his shoulders heavy with worry. At 32 years old, he never imagined he would be facing a jury accused of something he didn't do. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and the orange jumpsuit made him feel like he was already guilty. Michael had always been the one who did everything right. Growing up in Pine Heights, a neighborhood where many young men ended up in trouble, he had chosen a different path. He studied hard, stayed away from the wrong crowds, and eventually became a teacher at the local community college. His students loved him. He pushed them to dream bigger than their circumstances. But none of that mattered now, not with the mountain of evidence the prosecution claimed to have against him. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. Judge Eleanor Thompson had a reputation in town. People called her the Hammer because she came down hard on criminals. She was fair, but she didn't tolerate excuses. Her silver hair was pulled back tight, and her glasses sat low on her nose as she looked over the courtroom. Case number 47,293, the state versus Michael Wilson, charges of armed robbery, the clerk announced. The prosecutor, a man with slick hair and an expensive suit, approached the bench with confidence. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. The defendant was captured on security footage robbing First National Bank on April 15th. We have 3 witnesses who identified him, and items from the robbery were found near his apartment. He's facing a minimum of 50 years with these charges. Michael's court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. Michael had only met him twice before the trial, and both times Mr. Reynolds seemed distracted, overwhelmed with too many cases. The defense pleads not guilty, Your Honor, Mr. Reynolds said, but even he didn't sound convinced. As the prosecutor laid out the case, Michael stared at his hands. How could this be happening? The day of the robbery, he had been preparing lesson plans and then visited his mother. But no one could confirm his whereabouts for the exact time of the crime. From the bench, Judge Thompson studied Michael's face. In her 20 years on the bench, she had seen all types of criminals. The hardened ones who showed no emotion. The skilled liars who could cry on command. But something about this man's eyes caught her attention. There was fear there, yes, but not the fear of being caught. It was the fear of someone who couldn't understand how they ended up here. The security footage played on a screen for the courtroom. A man in a hoodie, face partially visible, waved a gun at a terrified bank teller. The prosecutor paused the video at a frame where the robber's face was clearest. As you can see, Your Honor, this is clearly the defendant, the prosecutor said. Michael shook his head slightly. The image was blurry, and yes, there was some resemblance, but it wasn't him. Why couldn't anyone else see that? Outside the courtroom, a small group had gathered. Michael's students, holding handmade signs. Teacher not criminal, one read. Free Mr. Wilson, said another. The windows were closed, but the chants could be faintly heard in the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow at the commotion outside. Armed robbers didn't usually have supporters. As the first day of the trial proceeded, witness after witness took the stand. A bank teller pointed at Michael with shaking fingers. That's him. I'm sure of it. A customer described the robber's height and build, which matched Michael's. A police officer testified about finding a bag with cash 2 blocks from Michael's apartment building. With each testimony, Michael felt hope slipping away. His life as he knew it, teaching his students, taking care of his aging mother, saving for a small house, was disappearing before his eyes. As the court adjourned for the day, Judge Thompson gathered her notes. She found herself looking once more at the defendant as officers led him away. Something didn't sit right with her about this case, though she couldn't put her finger on what. In a system designed to process people quickly, such feelings were usually pushed aside. But Judge Thompson had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and her instincts were telling her there was more to this story. What she didn't know yet was just how right she was, and that what she would uncover would shake the foundations of justice in her town. Day 2 of the trial brought more dark clouds over Michael's future. The prosecutor, Mr. Daniels, paced in front of the jury with confident steps, his voice filling the courtroom as he painted a picture of Michael's life that Michael himself barely recognized. Let's talk about where the defendant comes from, Mr. Daniels said, clicking a button to show a map on the large screen. A red circle highlighted Pine Heights. This neighborhood has one of the highest crime rates in our city. The defendant grew up here, surrounded by gang activity and drugs. Michael's mother, seated in the back row, pressed her lips together. She had raised her son alone in that neighborhood, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. She had kept him in school when many of his friends dropped out. Her eyes filled with tears as the prosecutor made it sound like growing up in Pine Heights made her son guilty by association. What the prosecution fails to mention, Mr. Reynolds finally spoke up, is that my client graduated at the top of his class. He'd earned scholarships. He has never been arrested before this. He chose to return to teach at the community college in the same neighborhood where he grew up to help other young people find a way out. For a moment, Michael felt a spark of hope. His lawyer was finally fighting for him. But Mr. Daniels quickly countered. A clean record doesn't mean innocence. It could just mean he never got caught before. During a short break, Michael watched through the courtroom windows as more people joined the small crowd outside. His students had spread the word. Now, parents were there too, and other teachers from the college. One held a sign with a picture of Michael at last year's graduation, his arm around a student who had overcome homelessness to earn his degree. When court resumed, the prosecution called a police detective to the stand. Detective Walker, a man with a buzz cut and cold eyes, testified about Michael's neighborhood. "We've had our eye on Pine Heights for years. It's a breeding ground for criminals," he said, making broad statements that made Michael's blood boil. He thought about his neighbors, the elderly woman who brought soup to anyone who got sick, the father who coached Little League on weekends, the teenagers who helped clean up the community park. None of them fit the detective's description. From her bench, Judge Thompson watched the defendant's reaction. Michael wasn't angry at being accused. He was angry at how his community was being portrayed. Interesting, she thought. The detective continued, showing surveillance photos of the bank robber. "The height matches, the build matches, and we have witness identifications," he said confidently. "And what about the defendant's alibi?" Judge Thompson asked, speaking up unexpectedly. The detective seemed caught off guard. "He claims he was home working on lesson plans, then visited his mother. Neither can be verified for the exact time of the robbery." Michael's mother stood up in the back of the courtroom. "I saw my son that day. He brought me groceries and stayed for dinner." "Please sit down, ma'am," the judge said firmly but not unkindly. "You'll have a chance to testify later." As the day wore on, Michael felt the weight of the evidence crushing him. How could he fight against security footage, witness statements, and a system that seemed ready to believe the worst about him because of where he came from? During the afternoon session, the prosecution showed Michael's bank records. "Notice the large deposit made 3 days after the robbery," Mr. Daniels said, circling a number on the screen. "That was my tax refund," Michael said to his lawyer, who nodded but didn't immediately object. Judge Thompson leaned forward. "Mr. Reynolds, do you wish to address this evidence?" Michael's lawyer fumbled with his papers. "Yes, Your Honor. We can provide documentation showing this was a tax refund deposit." "Why wasn't this provided earlier?" the judge asked. I only received my client's financial records yesterday," Mr. Reynolds admitted, looking embarrassed. Judge Thompson made a note. Poor preparation by the defense counsel. Another strike against Michael. As the second day ended, Michael was led back to his cell. His hope was fading. Outside the courthouse, though, the crowd had grown. News cameras had arrived. One of Michael's former students, now a journalist, was interviewing his colleagues about the kind of teacher and person Michael was. In her chambers, Judge Thompson watched the news coverage on her small TV. Something didn't add up. Armed robbers didn't usually have communities rallying behind them. They didn't usually have spotless records and careers dedicated to helping others. She pulled the case file closer and began to read through every detail again. There was something here she was missing. And Eleanor Thompson had never been one to ignore a mystery, especially when a man's life hung in the balance. The third day of the trial started like the others. Michael sat beside his lawyer, trying to keep hope alive despite everything pointing against him. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom, her face giving away nothing about what she was thinking. But something had changed. That morning, before court began, a courthouse worker had slipped a folded note onto her desk when no one was looking. "Check the security footage timestamps," was all it said. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no signature. As the prosecutor called his next witness, Judge Thompson found herself looking more closely at the security footage still displayed on the screen. Something about it nagged at her. "Your Honor," Mr. Daniels said, "we'd like to recall Detective Walker to discuss more evidence found near the defendant's home." The detective took the stand again, holding a plastic evidence bag containing a dark hoodie. "This matches what the robber wore in the footage. We found it in a dumpster 3 blocks from Mr. Wilson's apartment building." From his seat, Michael shook his head. "I've never seen that before," he whispered to his lawyer. "Detective," Judge Thompson spoke up, "could you tell the court when exactly this footage was taken?" Detective Walker looked at his notes. "The bank's security system shows 3:42 p.m. on April 15th. And the robbery lasted how long?" "About 6 minutes, Your Honor." Judge Thompson nodded, making a note. Something didn't add up with the times. She looked at the timestamp visible in the corner of the security footage. The minutes jumped from 3:44 to 3:47. A small detail, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but there it was, a 3-minute gap. During the lunch break, while others cleared the courtroom, Judge Thompson asked the court technician to play the footage again. She watched it several times, focusing on the timestamp in the corner. "Can you slow it down right here?" she asked, pointing to the moment the robber turned toward the camera. The technician did as asked. Frame by frame they watched. Then it happened. The timestamp jumped. 3 minutes missing. In a 6-minute robbery, that was half the event. When court resumed, Judge Thompson made an unusual request. "I'd like to see the original security footage in my chambers." "Not a copy, the original files from the bank's system." The prosecutor looked surprised. "Your Honor, we've provided the relevant sections as evidence." "I understand, Mr. Daniels, but I'd like to see the complete files. Today, if possible." Michael watched this exchange with confusion. What had the judge noticed? For the first time in days, he felt a tiny spark of hope. That afternoon, while testimony continued, a court officer brought a flash drive to Judge Thompson. During a short recess, she took it to her chambers and plugged it into her computer. The complete security footage told a different story. The man who entered the bank at 3:42 was indeed wearing a hoodie similar to Michael's build. But the missing 3 minutes showed something crucial. The robber's face was much more visible than in the edited footage, and despite some similarities, it clearly wasn't Michael. Even more concerning, the original footage showed another man outside the bank, watching from a car. A man Judge Thompson recognized as Robert Thompson, the nephew of William Thompson, one of the wealthiest businessmen in town and, coincidentally, a major donor to the district attorney's campaign. Judge Thompson sat back in her chair, her heart racing. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This looked like a deliberate framing. She picked up her phone and called an old friend who worked at the FBI. "Tom, I need a favor. It's about a case I'm presiding over. I think we have evidence tampering and possibly corruption." Back in the courtroom, Michael noticed Judge Thompson's expression had changed when she returned. She seemed focused, determined, and kept looking at Detective Walker with narrowed eyes. "Court is adjourned for today," she announced suddenly, cutting off the prosecutor mid-sentence. "We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And Detective Walker, please make yourself available. I'll have questions for you." As everyone filed out, Michael's mother caught his eye and gave him a small smile of encouragement. She had no idea what was happening, but she had faith in her son. That night, Judge Thompson stayed late in her office, reviewing case files and making phone calls. What had started as a straightforward trial was turning into something much bigger and much more dangerous. Someone had tampered with evidence to send an innocent man to prison for 50 years. The question was who and why. What Judge Thompson would uncover next would shake the foundations of the entire justice system in their town. Morning light filtered through the blinds in Judge Thompson's office as she spread papers across her desk. She hadn't slept much. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of a night spent digging through police reports, witness statements, and court documents. What had started as a feeling, a hunch that something wasn't right, had turned into a mountain of questions. Why were the original witness statements different from their court testimony? Why had Detective Walker changed key details in his report? And most troubling, why had someone edited the security footage? Judge Thompson picked up her phone and called her clerk. "Thomas, I need you to issue some subpoenas. And I need them fast." In his cell, Michael sat on the edge of his thin mattress, trying to make sense of what had happened in court yesterday. The judge had seemed different, more focused on details no one else had noticed. For the first time since his arrest, he allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, the truth would come out. His thoughts were interrupted by a guard. "Wilson, your lawyer's here." Mr. Reynolds looked different too, more alert, almost excited. "Something's happening," he said, keeping his voice low. "Judge Thompson has requested all the original evidence files. She's also asked to interview the bank teller again, privately." "What does that mean?" Michael asked. "I'm not sure yet, but judges don't usually do their own investigating. She's found something." Back in the courthouse, Judge Thompson was reviewing the complete witness statements. The bank teller's original statement described the robber as light-skinned, possibly Hispanic. Only in later statements did this change to match Michael's description. Similar changes appeared in other witness accounts. When the court session began, the gallery was packed. Word had spread that something unusual was happening in the Wilson case. Local reporters filled the back row. Michael's students were there again, joined by more community members. "Before we continue," Judge Thompson announced, "I'm ordering additional evidence to be entered into the record." She gestured to her clerk, who wheeled in a cart with boxes of files. The prosecutor stood up quickly. "Your Honor, what is this about?" "We've provided all relevant evidence." "That's the problem, Mr. Daniels. You provided what you deemed relevant." "I want to see everything." Her voice was calm but firm. Detective Walker shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge had noticed him whispering to the prosecutor, their faces tense. Throughout the day, Judge Thompson methodically presented the inconsistencies she'd found. The original witness statements, the complete security footage, phone records showing calls between Detective Walker and William Thompson's office on the day of the arrest. "Your Honor," the prosecutor protested, "this is highly irregular. The defense hasn't even requested these items." "That's because the defense wasn't aware they existed," she replied, looking pointedly at Mr. Reynolds, who had the good sense to look embarrassed about his lack of thorough investigation. Michael watched in amazement as the case against him began to crumble. Each new document Judge Thompson introduced seemed to point to a deliberate effort to frame him. But why? What had he done to deserve this? The answer came from an unexpected source. During the afternoon break, a young woman approached Michael's mother in the hallway. "I work at Pine Heights Community College," she said nervously, "in the administration office. A few months ago, your son filed a complaint against Thompson Industries for refusing to hire our graduates. He was pushing for the college to cut ties with them as a donor." Michael's mother immediately took this information to Mr. Reynolds, who brought it to the judge. When court resumed, Judge Thompson had one more surprise. "I'm calling a witness who wasn't on either the prosecution or defense list," she announced. A middle-aged woman entered, looking nervous. She was the head of security at First National Bank. "Ms. Chen, can you tell the court who has access to the bank's security footage?" Judge Thompson asked. "Only bank management and law enforcement with proper warrants," she replied. "And was the footage in this case accessed by anyone else?" Ms. Chen hesitated. "Yes. 2 days after the robbery, someone from Thompson Industries' security team requested to see it. Mr. William Thompson sits on our board of directors, so the request was approved." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Thompson let it continue for a moment before banging her gavel. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll be calling Detective Walker back to the stand. And I'm issuing a subpoena for Robert Thompson." She looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Wilson, I believe there's much more to this story than any of us initially understood." As Michael was led back to his cell, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, genuine hope that the truth would finally come to light. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the 5th day of trial. News had spread about Judge Thompson's unusual actions, and every seat was filled. Local TV stations had sent reporters. People stood along the walls. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Michael entered wearing the same orange jumpsuit, but his walk was different now. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes more focused. For the first time since his arrest, he felt like someone with power was actually looking at the facts, not just assuming he was guilty because of how he looked or where he came from. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom, her face serious. "Detective Walker, please take the stand," she said, wasting no time on formalities. The detective walked to the witness box, his confident stride from earlier days now replaced with stiff, nervous steps. He glanced at the prosecutor, who looked just as uncomfortable. "Detective," Judge Thompson began, "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case, including materials not originally submitted to this court." She held up a folder. "Would you like to explain why the original witness statements differ significantly from what was presented in court?" Detective Walker cleared his throat. "Witnesses often remember details differently over time, Your Honor." All 4 witnesses suddenly remembered the suspect was darker-skinned and taller. All 4 changed their descriptions in exactly the same way. She raised an eyebrow. "That seems unlikely." The detective shifted in his seat. Sweat appeared on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Let's move on," Judge Thompson continued. "Please explain this." She played the complete bank security footage on the courtroom screen, including the 3 minutes that had been cut out. "The man in this section of video is clearly not Mr. Wilson." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Michael's mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming in her eyes. I can't explain that, Your Honor," the detective stammered. "The footage we received was already edited." Judge Thompson finished his sentence. "From whom did you receive this footage?" The detective looked down at his hands. The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone leaning forward to hear his answer. "We received it from Thompson Industries security team," he finally admitted. Mr. Thompson offered to help with the case since the bank is one of his business interests. Judge Thompson nodded slowly. "I see. And these phone records showing 7 calls between you and Robert Thompson on the day of Mr. Wilson's arrest, can you explain those?" The detective's face went pale. "I can't comment on an ongoing investigation." "What investigation?" Judge Thompson asked sharply. Before he could answer, the courtroom doors opened. 2 men in suits entered, showing badges to the security guards. "Your Honor," one of them said, "I'm Agent Lee with the FBI. We're here because of information you provided regarding possible evidence tampering and corruption." The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "This is highly irregular. The FBI has no jurisdiction." "They do when there's evidence of civil rights violations and corruption across county lines," Judge Thompson interrupted. She turned to the agents. I believe Detective Walker was about to explain his relationship with the Thompson family. Detective Walker looked frantically around the room, like a trapped animal. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's probably wise," Judge Thompson replied. She turned to the FBI agents. "Gentlemen, I've prepared files for you in my chambers. My clerk will show you there. We'll take a 30-minute recess." As people began to move around the courtroom, Michael leaned toward his lawyer. "What's happening?" Mr. Reynolds, looking stunned himself, shook his head in disbelief. "I think the judge just blew this whole case wide open." In her chambers, Judge Thompson showed the FBI agents everything she'd found. The security footage was edited to remove parts that would have cleared Mr. Wilson. Witness statements were altered. Evidence was planted. All signs point to the Thompson family trying to frame him. "But why?" Agent Lee asked. "Why target this particular man?" Judge Thompson handed him another file. Michael Wilson filed a formal complaint against Thompson Industries 3 months ago. He discovered they were refusing to hire graduates from the community college, where he teaches if they came from certain neighborhoods, mostly Black and Hispanic areas. He was gathering evidence for a discrimination lawsuit and pushing the college to cut ties with them as donors. Agent Lee nodded slowly. So they decided to make him disappear into the prison system. 50 years for armed robbery, Judge Thompson said quietly. He would have died in prison. Back in the courtroom, Michael watched as FBI agents spoke with Detective Walker in the corner. The detective's face had crumpled, and he was nodding, talking quickly. Someone was finally listening to the truth, and for the first time, Michael allowed himself to believe that he might go home again. Word spread through town like wildfire. By morning, news vans lined the street outside the courthouse. The story had caught national attention, a respected judge uncovering what appeared to be a conspiracy to frame an innocent man by one of the town's wealthiest families. Court was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m., but by 7, the line to get seats stretched around the block. Michael's students organized, passing out water to people waiting in the morning sun. They wore T-shirts they'd made overnight, "Justice for Mr. Wilson," printed in bold letters. Inside his holding cell, Michael barely touched his breakfast. Today could change everything. His lawyer had visited late last night, explaining that after Detective Walker started talking to the FBI, things moved quickly. Overnight, federal agents had executed search warrants at Thompson Industries, the detective's home, and even the district attorney's office. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Thompson entered the courtroom precisely at 9 a.m. Her face revealed nothing, but those who knew her well could see determination in her eyes. "Before we continue with this trial," she began, "there have been significant developments that this court must address." She nodded to her clerk, who opened the side door. 2 FBI agents entered, escorting a handcuffed man in an expensive suit. Robert Thompson, nephew of William Thompson and executive vice president of Thompson Industries, looked nothing like the powerful businessman whose photo often appeared in the local paper. His face was pale, his normally perfect hair disheveled. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Michael leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. "The court has received evidence that Mr. Robert Thompson was directly involved in framing the defendant," Judge Thompson announced. "Last night, a search of his home recovered the original, unedited security footage, as well as communications between Mr. Thompson and Detective Walker discussing how to build a false case against Mr. Wilson." The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of." "Please sit down, Mr. Daniels. Your involvement or lack thereof will be determined by the federal investigation." Her voice was ice cold. "What matters now is that an innocent man has spent weeks in jail, facing 50 years in prison based on fabricated evidence." She turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I rarely do this, but I am directing a verdict of not guilty. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Wilson could not have committed this crime." Michael's mother began to sob quietly in the gallery. Friends patted her shoulders, their own eyes filled with tears. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, "I am ordering Mr. Wilson's immediate release and recommending a full investigation into corruption within our police department and prosecutor's office." She turned to Michael, her voice softening slightly. "Mr. Wilson, on behalf of this court and our justice system, I offer my sincere apology for what you have endured." Michael stood, his legs shaky. "Thank you, Your Honor," was all he could manage to say. Robert Thompson was led away by FBI agents as Judge Thompson explained what had happened. The real bank robber had been Robert himself, staging the crime to collect insurance money for the bank, which was struggling financially despite his uncle's public claims about its success. When Michael's discrimination complaint threatened the Thompson family business, Robert saw an opportunity to solve 2 problems at once. The security footage clearly shows Robert Thompson committing the robbery, Judge Thompson explained. He then used his connections to edit the footage and pressure witnesses to change their statements. Detective Walker, in exchange for significant payments, helped build the case against Mr. Wilson. As she spoke, more FBI agents entered the courtroom. One approached the prosecutor, speaking quietly. Mr. Daniels' face drained of color. "It appears this may not be the first time such tactics have been used," Judge Thompson said, watching this exchange. "The FBI has found evidence suggesting other innocent people may have been framed over the past several years." Michael looked around the courtroom in disbelief. This went beyond just his case. How many others had been sent to prison based on lies? How many lives had been destroyed? As the bailiff removed his handcuffs, Michael rubbed his wrists. Freedom was just moments away, but the weight of what had almost happened, still felt heavy on his shoulders. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited to capture his first moments as a free man. But more importantly, his mother waited, arms open, ready to take her son home. 6 months later, Michael stood at the front of his classroom at Pine Heights Community College. 30 eager faces looked back at him, students hanging on his every word. Since his return to teaching, enrollment in his classes had doubled. Many came to learn from the man whose story had changed their town forever. Justice isn't automatic, he told them, setting down his book. It takes people willing to look deeper than what's on the surface. People brave enough to ask questions when something doesn't seem right. A young woman raised her hand. Is that why you started the Innocence Project chapter here? Michael nodded. The past 6 months had transformed not just his life, but the entire community. After his release, the FBI investigation had uncovered 12 other cases where innocent people had been framed using similar tactics. 8 people had already been released from prison, with more cases under review. Sometimes the system fails, Michael said, but that doesn't mean we give up on it. It means we work harder to fix it. After class, Michael walked across campus to a new building. The sign outside read Community Justice Center. Inside, volunteers helped people who couldn't afford lawyers. Law students from the state university provided free legal advice. Social workers connected families with resources. This center had been Michael's idea, born from the darkest days of his life. The settlement money from his lawsuit against the city, the police department, and Thompson Industries had funded it. He could have moved away, bought a big house, started over somewhere new. Instead, he chose to stay and help others who faced the same broken system that had almost stolen his life. At the reception desk, Michael's mother greeted visitors with a warm smile. After everything that happened, she'd quit her job to work at the center full-time. Fighting for what's right runs in the family, she often said. In her chambers across town, Judge Thompson reviewed files on her desk. The past 6 months had been the busiest of her career. After Michael's case, she had been appointed to lead a state commission on judicial reform. Her team was reviewing thousands of convictions, looking for patterns of misconduct. Her phone rang. Judge Thompson speaking. Eleanor, it's Governor Phillips. I've been following your work with the commission. What you've uncovered is troubling, to say the least. 17 officers involved in evidence tampering. 5 prosecutors who knowingly used false testimony. And we're just getting started, she said, her voice tired but determined. That's why I'm calling. I want you to lead a new state-level oversight committee for criminal justice. Full authority, independent budget. We need to clean house across the state. Judge Thompson looked at the photo on her desk, her swearing in as a judge 20 years ago. She had promised to uphold justice. For years, she thought she was doing that by following the rules. Michael's case had shown her that sometimes justice required breaking from routine, asking difficult questions, and challenging those in power. Across town, William Thompson, once the most powerful businessman in the area, watched the news from his living room. His company's stock had plummeted. His nephew faced 20 years in prison. His own indictment on corruption charges was expected any day. The news showed Michael cutting a ribbon at the Community Justice Center's official opening. The reporter called him a catalyst for change in a system that had failed too many for too long. William turned off the TV, unable to watch anymore. At the center, Michael finished his speech to applause from the crowd. Cameras flashed as he shook hands with the mayor and Judge Thompson. The 3 of them had become unlikely allies in pushing for reform. As people mingled afterward, a young man approached Michael quietly. My brother's in prison, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years now for something he didn't do. Nobody would listen to us before, but now. Hope filled his eyes. Can you help us? Michael placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. 6 months ago, he had been in a cell, facing 50 years for a crime he didn't commit. Now he stood free, with the power to help others. That's why we're here, he said. Let's get started.